In today's episode, during listener Q&A, Stacy and I talk about the importance of lead safety training.
And later, I chat with Amy and Rachel from the historic Murray First Foundation.
But first,
I'm Stacy Grinsfelder.
And I'm Daniel Cantor.
This is True Tales from Old Houses, episode 93. Hey, Daniel.
Hey, Stacy, how are you?
I'm great, just great. Before we launch into today's episode, I want to make sure and say thank you to our Season 9 sponsors, the Craftsman Store, Sutherland Wells, Preservan, and Abatron.
Yes, thank you to all of them. We love our sponsors.
We really do, and I think we're just very lucky to have them.
Seriously.
I only have one announcement today, and that's just a quick reminder about the trip that I am hosting to Quebec City, Montreal, and the Canadian Maritimes on August 10th through 20th. You know, I'm going to keep saying this every episode until that booking window closes. So thank you, everyone, for your patience. And more than anything, I hope that you will go on this trip with me. We're going to be heading to Prince Edward Island, Halifax also. Those are different places that we'll be stopping. We're going to go overnight on a train, which I think sounds great. I hope everybody else does too, because it could be sort of like a, I don't know, Murder on the Orient Express situation. I don't know. But we're going to see the Cape Breton Highlands National Park and tons of old buildings. So I'm going to put that link right in the show notes where you can find out more about that trip and book it. I think I said this, maybe not. The $200 deposit holds your spot, and the full payment isn't due until May 27th. So again, I'm going to be talking about it a lot because the booking window is still open, and I really want you along with me. It'll be great. We'll have fun.
It sounds so fun, Stacy. I want to come. I don't think I can, but I'm going to try to.
I wish you could come too. Oh my gosh, could you imagine how much fun we'd have together?
Maybe too much, honestly.
It could be too much. It could be too much. Do you have any announcements, Daniel?
Oh, I don't think so. Do you want to hear about my new pants I bought?
You bought new pants? That's your announcement? You're going to announce your new pants?
Well, I didn't think it was worth the time, so we can move on.
We do have a little something to clear up. We're past announcements, but we have a little something to clear up. It's about ship versus boat. And you mentioned something to me. We were recording, I think it was when we were working on Gina's episode, and we were recording separately. It didn't make it onto the podcast, but you said something to me about, oh, I had no idea how important it was to specify between a ship and a boat, because we had gone even farther back in time to talk about Christopher Wilson's episode, The Aurora, the boat restoration. So this was all news to me. What were you talking about?
Well, gosh, I barely know what I was talking about, but I think I had like a recovered memory of a ship person taking a lot of offense to it being called a boat. And I actually listened back to the episode because I was like, oh gosh, did we offend Chris? And he was very gracious about it. And in fact, he used the word boat a couple times. So I don't think that we really screwed up, but apparently there is a big difference. And I feel like I'm digging myself a deeper hole because I don't totally know. But according to a brief internet search, it sounds like a boat is usually inland and it's smaller in general. A ship is seafaring, so oceans, rivers, lakes, deep bodies of water. It's also a larger vessel than a boat. And a ship usually encompasses commercial vessels, like a Navy ship or like a shipping ship, I guess. A shipping ship. A cruise ship, that would be a ship. And I think the basic rule of thumb is if you encounter somebody who is the captain of a ship, do not call it a boat, like I seemingly did over and over and over again.
Well, I'm sure I called it a boat. You listened again. Did I really mess it up as well?
Oh, you definitely. We both did. We just wild abandoned. So anyway, now everyone can let us know how we're wrong the second time about being wrong the first time. We're doing our best.
So last time we talked, I was going to Utah, and now I am back from Utah.
Welcome home.
Thank you. Thank you. It's kind of like going to another country, if only briefly. No, it's not. It's really not. I'm getting used to it. You know, Andy has an apartment, or it's actually a condo, and it's kind of nice. You know, it's forced downtime because that condo doesn't need anything and I don't need to do anything to it. And so I get to sleep a little bit late. I don't have a dog who needs to be walked. I just have been getting some furniture and rugs and things for it because it was pretty empty. The first few times I visited, I didn't like it at all because he basically owned one chair and like a TV tray. I thought nobody wants to stay here. This is like the worst Airbnb. There's no amenities here at all.
He's still a boy, Stacy.
Yes. But it is getting much, much better. And we had a good time. But I had a quick story to tell you about this little building that I stumbled upon. So downtown Salt Lake they are destroying their historic structures just about as fast as they can. So basically, they do it. I kind of came into the politics of Salt Lake City during a very big upheaval. So I have been really careful about not getting too involved, trying to sit back, stand back, understand what's going on rather than joining in some sort of fray that I really know nothing about. That's kind of the way I am. I'm not going to just jump in and start being angry because I'm not an angry person.
I will. Filled with rage. Filled to the brim.
But what I have started to understand is that it's true. About as quick as they can destroy them, they will. And they will build condo buildings. They'll build any sort of high rise, whatever. That's what the mayor wants for that city right now. And that's what the general consensus is. So Andy and I were walking. We were going over to there's this little outdoor mall area. And we happened to go, I don't remember what street we were on. Whoever's from Salt Lake, they're going to know immediately what street I was on. But I looked over to the right, and between these giant, giant high rises is this tiny little historic building, like completely dwarfed. I mean, it's probably 25 feet tall. Picture that with these 20, 30-story buildings above it. And it was so cute. And I said, Andy, we have to walk over there. And so we did. And we walked over, and it turns out it looked like the windows had a bunch of tape on them. And I thought, oh, this building is done for. Why would this single little building be here? It's going to last maybe, I give it 6 months tops. And when I come back next time, it's just going to be a pile of rubble. So I mentioned this on the internet, and Wendy, who has a podcast called Demolished Salt Lake Podcast. And quite frankly, it's all about all of the lost historic buildings. And so it's really sad. I mean, isn't that a sad podcast?
Well, good for her for documenting it and talking about it.
So I'm thinking, gosh, I don't know what's going to happen to this building. And it's just so sad because it was so cute, 1890. So it turns out it's actually the Christopher Kramer House and Floral Shop. There was a man named Christopher Kramer from Denmark. He moved to Salt Lake City in 1860, built this building in, I think, 1890. And he lived above it. And then he had a flower shop. He was a florist below.
Wow.
So Wendy contacted me. We just were friends on Instagram. Hopefully she'll come on maybe and talk about that building at some point, just do a little segment with us. But turns out it's on the National Register of Historic Places, which is not a guarantee that anything will be protected. I don't want to give anyone a false sense of security about that. But it just so happens that there was a provision for it to be saved. So whoever owns that property, they have to save it. And I guess, so it's going to be a restaurant. It's going to still be there. What a happy ending.
That is very nice. It's hard to find those kinds of stories sometimes. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I worked for somebody who owns a house that was originally owned by the florists in town here in Kingston. And it was right around the same time. And the thing that never occurred to me until this job was that the house that he lived in was originally the first house in this entire neighborhood because they had to own all this land and they had 100,000 square feet or something of greenhouse space to grow the flowers. Because at the time you couldn't just ship in flowers every single day. Like, do you know if he also had like a grow operation there? Or, I mean, I'm fascinated with how these things were done because
I don't know, but I hope somebody who's listening will know. What I do understand is that building, these all to me look like little baby Italianates. That's kind of how I call them mountain Italianates because they are the little commercial buildings, basically. So there would have been several in a row. And this particular one is the only one left. So I don't know the answer to that, but that is an interesting question. It makes sense that they would, but the city wasn't exactly rural. It was a city. So I don't know the answer. Maybe they could grow them somewhere else and bring them over to the flower shop. Or I don't know. But maybe Wendy from Demolished Salt Lake Podcast, maybe she'll know. But anyway, that was my trip to Salt Lake City. And then I'm headed to Austin this weekend. I don't think there's a ton of historic buildings in Austin as well. I think there's a few neighborhoods, but I don't think there's like a whole district, which is also very sad.
I feel like, gosh, why would I pretend to know? I feel like Austin, their real like architectural heyday was like mid-century modern, I think. I've been there.
I'll report back. How's that?
I can't wait. You're doing so much travel. This is wild.
I love traveling as much as possible. It's good. It's all worked out this way. Just basically sometimes here for the podcast because Andy travels and I get to tag along a little bit. Just here and there. It's all working out. But how about you? What have you been doing?
I've just been plodding away on my little project. So I feel like I hit a little bit of a milestone with this house that I've been working on for years that I call Bluestone Cottage. It lives right down the street from my house. And yesterday I nailed the last piece of molding to another piece of molding on the second floor. So
that's huge.
Then I got to spend all day just pulling out of the second floor, getting all the stuff out. Like I use a ton of salvaged wood with all of my projects, mostly just because I like it and I think it's a fun challenge. But then you end up with all these little tiny scraps and you're so afraid to throw them away until like you're really sure you're not going to need them. And so this is like the day, and I got to fill contractor bags, which I'm not really used to doing, and it was great. So yeah, wow. I don't really have to go back upstairs until the walls are mudded, and then we're just in total finish mode. I can't believe it. So
that must feel like $1 million.
It felt pretty good. I can't lie.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, we need to take a quick break. I know I did all the talking, but we need to take a quick break because listener Q&A is up next.
Okay. See you on the other side.
True Tales from Old Houses is supported by the Craftsman Store, another excellent resource from Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog. The Craftsman Store is your go-to place for old house tools and supplies.
So once again, our friend Scott has taken the hassle out of tracking down all those little specialized old house supplies that we need and put them all in one place for us. So it's a cozy little online hardware store full of books, tools, replacement parts, and more.
Right. And I've talked before about buying my window restoration supplies, some of those, especially diamond glazing points from the Craftsman Store. But I was peeking in there. You know, Scott's written 4 books. All of those are available there, or you can get them on a thumb drive all together. He has plaster supplies, hinges, just a whole bunch of little odds and ends that are really difficult to find anywhere else.
Yeah, he's such a smart guy, and this site is so helpful. So from window restoration to plaster repair, they have everything you need to do the job like a pro.
So check it out today at thecraftsmanstore.com, and to save 10% on your order, use our coupon code TrueTales. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Preservan, a unique preservation franchise opportunity developed by longtime window restoration pro and our friend Ty McBride. The mission of Preservan is to save the future by preserving the past.
Well, that sounds great. So what exactly is Preservan, though?
Well, what if you could go to work every day on your own terms while also doing something meaningful within your community? And what if you could start a home service business without owning complicated and expensive tools that are difficult to transport to and from job sites? The team at Preservan, they will train you to operate a Preservan business in your community, equipping you with the tools you need to perform sustainable wood rot repairs and build your own team of epoxy techs.
That's awesome. So how does that part work?
As part of the Preservan family, you'll receive the playbook for a proven preservation business, exclusive access to ever-resin epoxy products, business software, and all of the marketing, advertising, training, and technical support you need. Owning a Preservan franchise offers the perfect opportunity for work-life balance while serving your neighbors and community in a recession-proof industry.
I love this business. It also gives you the opportunity to work your own hours and spend the rest of your time in ways that are important to you. So to learn more about becoming a part of the Preservan family and their mission, go to Preservan Franchise. That's Preservan, preservanfranchise.com/true tales.
All right, we are back. Was that fun for you, Daniel?
It was really fun, Stacy. Yeah, I think recording ads is a part of doing this I did not expect to be fun, and it's kind of my favorite thing. I think it's like a weird lifelong dream.
I really like it too. I feel so proud. Like it makes me sit up a little taller and I enunciate my words. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. And it's also very fun doing it with another person. I can tell you that much.
We're very official. I'm working on the pronunciation part. Everyone be patient.
We have all kinds of patience because we're glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So this is listener Q&A. And Daniel, you and I recently went through the EPA-led safety certification course. We are now certified renovators for 5 years. How does that make you feel?
Almost as accomplished as I felt when I became a certified excavator in the state of New York. It's true.
Oh, that's great. I guess we're technically qualified now to train people in lead safety. I don't know anything about excavating, but we will have to talk about that at some point.
I don't really either, other than call DigSafe or you will get in trouble.
All right. So how did you find your experience at this training? We went to 2 different trainings. You went in Kingston. I went in Buffalo, New York. We had 2 different instructors, but we did, I think, go through the same training program. And it's an EPA approved program. So that's the requirement for getting the certification. But yeah, how was your experience?
I liked it. I mean, I really dragged my feet just because I didn't want to sit in a classroom all day. But my boyfriend, Brad, signed both of us up and then I had to. And it was pretty fun. Our instructor was great. It was a classroom that was all men and had this really cool lady instructor, Cindy, who was not taking crap from anyone. And it was great. It was really fun.
Mine was interesting. It will surprise no one that I was the only woman there. Our instructor was a man, and he was an odd duck, let me tell you. But he talked with his eyes closed. And at one point he goes, "Oh, I know it's kind of weird that I talk with my eyes closed, but I have a photographic memory. So if I close my eyes, I can see everything on the page and remember it." And I was like, okay, great. That's amazing. So he talked really fast. He went off topic a lot. And while I usually like a good tangent, I just kept looking at my watch thinking, there is no way this class is getting over by 5 o'clock. But somehow he brought it all together and we got out of there. But I thought it was interesting, I guess. I don't really feel like I learned a whole lot that I didn't already know, which I don't know if I should be proud of that or a little ashamed.
I think you should be. Well, also, I know this. The listeners may not know this, but with all of those tangents and the eyes closed talking and your hurdles and tribulations, you managed to score 100% on the exam at the end. Brad and I, it turns out we're B students. we both got, I think, 84%. So somehow you also got a better education and retained more, which makes me furious.
I don't know how I did it. I'm glad you brought that up, Daniel, because I really wanted to brag a little bit about it, but I'm glad you brought that up.
It's the elephant in the room. We can't escape that Stacy is just smarter and more qualified than all of us, but
they gave us all a certificate, so there's that.
Well, there you go. I was surprised by the things that I learned that technically you don't have to do. I thought I would get in there and be like, oh gosh, I've been doing everything wrong for years. And this is exactly why I didn't want to be in this classroom, is to find that out. And turns out I've actually been doing things pretty right and sometimes above and beyond what the law requires. So that was reassuring in a way.
Yeah, I agree. That surprised me too. So I got a question on Instagram, and although it wasn't specifically for us to answer on the podcast, I thought it was such a great one that I brought it here. We'll make it short because I know we just talked about our experiences and we kind of ate up the time here in Q&A. But the question was from either Helen. I think the question was from Helen. She's on Instagram, but she and Callum share an Instagram account. So I'm not exactly sure who submitted this question. And she asked, do you think the EPA lead safety certification course is necessary for someone just renovating their own home? I thought it was an amazing question because I mean, that's a good one. Who wouldn't wonder, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think?
Well, I think it's a really good question. I think it depends on a few factors. Number one, I guess how much lead you are likely to be dealing with in your house. So if your house is built before 1978, I believe is the date.
Yes.
There's a pretty high probability that there's lead paint somewhere in your house. I think there's lots of ways to get this information outside of this course. So it's not as though the choice is between no education or sitting in a classroom for 8 hours. There's an in-between there. In my case, the course that I took was actually free. It was sponsored by my county's health department. So we didn't have to pay for it. We got a nice book at the end to remind you of what you learned and everything. And I can definitely see the function of it. I think, on the other hand, it's specifically for people that are doing this work professionally, and more specifically for people who are just doing like painting and repair and renovation work. This is not going to train you in how to abate lead or even do testing beyond just tests that you can go buy at the hardware store. So all of that being said, when I bought my house, I knew lead was bad. Obviously, everyone does. It wasn't until I had like this really old, salty contractor come through the house who was looking at something, I think drywall, or I'm not sure, that I needed done. And right before he walked out the front door, he turned to me and he goes, "You got to be careful with that lead." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I know. And he goes, "Do you know what it does to you?" And I'm like, "No." And in that moment, I was like, "No, I really don't." And he just turned to me and goes, "It makes you mean." And then he slammed my door and left. That was it. So honestly, for a long time, I was like, well, it makes you mean. So I definitely learned more about the ways in which it is a scary substance and one we need to be really careful around.
Yeah. Well, so in my case, I had to pay for this class. I had to pay, I think, around $275. So would I pay $275 if I wasn't getting reimbursed through proceeds from my business? Probably not, because like I said, I don't feel like I learned a whole lot that I didn't already know. And the Secretary of Interior standard, or not Secretary of Interior standards, I'm sorry, the EPA has the Renovate Right standards for homeowners directly on the internet, which you can read. So do I think knowing about lead is important? Yes. And I get very, very tired of watching. The joking term is called preservation cowboys, who will basically just be like, "Oh, lead's no problem. It's not a big problem. Only if you eat it, only if you do." But I get really frustrated watching people do work on Instagram or on their blogs that never even mention the fact that lead could be a factor. I don't think you have to huddle in a corner shivering and worrying about how things are going to work out in your old house because lead is everywhere. But you have to know, be smart. I mean, and I say this, sometimes I come across as pretty aggressive, but the reason is because I care about you and I care about your family and I care about your pets. And it's the right thing to do. Know how to take care of yourself, your family, your pets in your old house when it comes to lead. But do you have to pay for a certification? I think absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I guess I would say one thing that I think about, though, is when you buy an old house and you are renovating that old house, it is only a matter of time before a friend or many friends are like, "Can you come help me work on my old house?" And so if you are lead certified and you're doing that work in somebody else's home, you're okay. Technically, if you're going and helping somebody with their house and you're not lead certified, you could get in trouble. So
that's true.
Is the risk high? I don't think so, but it's a thing to think about. And, I think it's the kind of thing that like knowledge is power. And especially if you have the opportunity to just do it for free, it's fun to say you're certified in something and you will learn. I mean, I learned stuff. I really did.
Okay.
Helen or Callum, whoever you may be, thank you so much for that excellent question. And if anybody else has a question for us to answer on an upcoming episode, please go to truetalesfromoldhouses.com. You can submit it through the contact form. And if your question is too technical for us, the smartest people in the world, we'll try to find a pro to help answer it. So hit us with your best shot. We're ready.
We need to take another quick break, Daniel.
Okay.
Time for your favorite part.
I love this part.
True Tales from Old Houses is supported by Sutherland Wells. All of the Sutherland Wells products are handcrafted in Providence, Rhode Island with the highest quality, sustainably grown tung oil. Tung oil, native to China, has been used for centuries as a durable finish for wood, metal, and stone.
Unlike polyurethane, tung oil finish penetrates the surface of the wood, so it flexes and contracts as conditions change, which makes it the perfect pre-finish or protectant for everything from fine furniture to window sash and sills.
So I use a combination of primer and tung oil, and specifically for pre-coat, I've been using Clarabelle's. But Sutherland Wells, they do have an entire product line for whatever you're working on right now. Siding, hardwood floors, furniture restoration, cutting boards, you name it.
So to learn more about the complete product line, visit Sutherland Wells, that's WELLES, sutherlandwells.com. And to save 10% on your first order, use the coupon code TRUETALES. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Abitron, which is now a division of UC Coatings.
Abitron manufactures two of my very favorite products on the planet. You know them because I say it over and over, liquid wood and wood epox. I've talked about them on Instagram and on my blog, and I use them personally all the time to repair wood rot on windows and doors.
Yeah, they're such amazing products. I've used them all over the place on every house I've ever worked on. They're great.
Well, liquid wood and wood epox products make permanent, cost-effective repairs wherever you find rotted or damaged wood. And whether you're a first-timer or a professional tradesperson, Abitron products are super easy to use. The instructions are simple and the results are exceptional. No shrinking or sagging, and repairs can be sanded and painted, just like wood.
And in addition to wood repair, Abitron now also offers other great products for old homes, specifically for concrete repair, plaster repair, window glazing, and more.
So check out their website at abitron.com or follow them on Instagram at abitron_UC or on Facebook at Abitron, a division of UC Coatings.
And from now until April 7th, Abitron has a special coupon code just for True Tales from Old Houses listeners. Enter REPAIR10 at abitron.com for 10% off your order. That's REPAIR10 to save 10% off your order at abitron.com.
We are back, and our guests today are Amy Thomas and Rachel Morrow from the Historic Murray First Foundation. Now, this was a solo interview. I did this in person on my last trip to Utah, and I did miss you, Daniel.
I missed you so much, but I did get to hear a preview. It's a great interview, and these women are so cool. I want to be their best friend.
Well, building preservation in Utah is an uphill battle, and Amy and Rachel are fighting the good fight.
I am Amy, and I am the current president of Historic Murray First Foundation. I joined because I just love my own historic homes. I've worked on restoring 2 of them so far, and it was just something I was really passionate about and wanted to get involved in the community.
Hi, I'm Rachel Morrow. I am one of the founders of Historic Murray First and currently the vice president. I got involved with this because I absolutely love fine art and architecture. I'm an artist myself, and I'm trying to make a counterpoint to all of the architecture that's going up in the city that's not exceptional. So we're trying to push for exceptional things in our city.
Thank you so much for being here, both of you. So nice to meet you.
Yeah, we're really happy to meet you.
Thank you.
This is great. So you are really my first interview on location in Utah. So thank you for being my
Wow,
first.
that's exciting.
When I found out I was going to move here, I pictured being able to interview different places, people in different places. And I'm really excited that dream is coming true.
We're excited to be the first.
Exactly.
All right. Well, since you are the first, I would like to start with a brief history. We're not in Salt Lake City. We are Salt Lake adjacent. We're in Murray. We're about 15 minutes south. But when you're driving here, you're pretty much all in the same area.
I'm going to let Rachel take this one.
Murray, it was a ore processing community. They would have the miners send the ore down on the trains from the canyons. And Murray was the site where it was dropped off, processed. We still have the skeleton of the ore sampling building. It's really our last remaining building of Murray's ore processing history. It was all around here. And it's kind of been difficult to see the pieces of our history getting chipped away, but so much of it was connected to the mining operation. And the people that located here were was a very cosmopolitan little city. There were people from all over the world that came here to work in the smelting operation. And so they had little neighborhoods, like there was an Armenian neighborhood. There was, I think, a little Japanese neighborhood, a Hispanic neighborhood, and people would settle where they could communicate with each other. And so one of the things that we like to do is get some kind of recognition and plaques or some kind of marker at the street corners, maybe, of each of these neighborhoods that talked about the history, because we still have some of those smelting houses. I mean, quite a few of them are still existing in our neighborhoods around Murray. And it would be neat for people to know who lived there and settled there. And the buildings that we have in our historic downtown, the ones that we have remaining were many of them theaters. Early, in the early history of film, we had a collection of probably 4 or 5 within the same city block area. You just imagine the people going to work at the smelters and the refining process, and then like weekends they would be with their families at the theaters on State Street. They had a different sort of political view than the rest of Salt Lake. I think Amy and I've kind of laughed. I think in the 1920s they elected the first socialist mayor of Murray, and great. That would be a rarity for the Salt Lake Valley. Sure. So they've always had this independent, like, well, these are our values. This is the way we do things.
Sure. So how does Murray, like when I think of Salt Lake City, I think of, we had the Mormon pioneers. They came, they were looking for religious freedom. They settled in that area. And then Murray here is pretty close. So how does Murray fit into that? Is it completely separate?
It's interesting because I feel like because Murray has always been sort of its own little independent hub literally in the middle of the valley. And there was much more diversity from the beginning. People would be here with their own religious and cultural traditions. And I feel like it probably was more diverse from a religious standpoint.
I do want to say, like, the person who built my house, so I'm in a little 1895 Victorian house. It's really close to where the smelter processing was. And it was actually built by he was LDS, and he built it for his second wife. He had 3. This was his second wife's house. And I mean 3 at the same time.
Sure.
That's the history here.
We are familiar.
Yes. Yeah. And the wife that he built it for was heavily involved in the church. He also donated the land to Murray City. That's now Murray City Park.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. That's great. All right. So I think it's worth mentioning because I have fake laughed through so many jokes of people asking me if my husband was going to get another wife because we were moving to Utah. And I like to explain to people that although fundamentalism still exists in this area, it is not a tenet of the modern LDS religion. And I think that's important to note because it shapes everything, I think, in this area. We outside of Utah are not as familiar with anything except what we hear or the specials that we watch on Netflix or whatnot. Yeah. But there's a lot going on here that is not related to fundamentalist Mormons.
That's correct. They're definitely few and far between. I mean, there are some that are more modern that do live in Salt Lake, and you'd look at them and you wouldn't know. But you can also go down south. My husband actually has family who are fundamentalists. And so we've had some nice family reunions where the women are dressed in those dresses and they've got their hair. But they are few and far between here at most of Utah. Yeah.
So I can speak to that a little bit because I'm active in the LDS Church, and it's something that was stopped officially in 1890, and the church has distanced itself from that in the 20th century, and obviously going on. It's very difficult topic for anyone, inside or outside of the church to deal with. I personally am not in love with the idea, and I'm not in love with that part of the church history. And of course, I don't speak for the church, just for myself, but most everybody that has some kind of roots here has that backstory somewhere in their family line.
And I know we're not here to talk about that, but I really am happy that we can spend a minute or two on it, because if we can clear that up now, I'm going to be talking to a lot of people in Utah. Yeah. I don't really want to go through that every single time.
No, of course.
All right. Well, let's get back to historic Murray first, because I've got the president here. I've got the vice president. When did this start and why? You touched on that in your introduction, but I would like to know more.
So back in 2018, a friend who was really sort of the foundation and started everything, her name's Kathleen Stanford, she was trying to save what is called the Historic Murray First Award. And it was, I believe, the first, if not one of the first chapels, LDS chapels in this area. And it was built by an architect called Nils Edward Lillienberg, and he built a number of beautiful churches along the same style. Some of them are still standing, but we have lost a number of them. But she had a particular affection for this. And at the time, it was being used as a private school, but it had not been maintained or kept up by the family that had bought it and was running it as a private school, just because it's so expensive. The funds just aren't there to do everything. So it had fallen into great disrepair. And next to it was a Carnegie Library that had been altered in the 70s and had a very modern 70s sort of facade on it. But before it had undergone that, it was one of those beautiful Carnegie Library entrances with the columns on either side, very symmetrical, very classical. So the 70s were not kind to architecture.
Definitely not. Definitely
and
not.
It suffered, but it was still there, and it could have been probably put back into its original state. But we were trying to save those two buildings because they were both owned by the same family that was running the charter school. Kathleen had tried really hard to get the city to agree to buy that property, and they weren't interested in taking that on because the family that had owned it was just like, well, it's too far gone. It's not safe. We can't keep it up. We're going to sell it and move our school somewhere else. They were trying really hard to sell that off. And we were just getting formed and founded. So we were going through all of the growing pains of trying to get established as a nonprofit 501c3 and trying to advocate for these properties. And the city administration at the time was very antagonistic to historic preservation. And
we should talk about that. Before we go on, I actually do want to pause and ask you that, because I think it will set up what we're talking about really nicely. But what is the state of preservation in Salt Lake County?
It is not great, and it's really a sad thing. And that's one of the frustrations that I have with my faith tradition, is that they sold a lot of these buildings that were these historic buildings back in the 70s. They divested of a lot of these rather than maintain and improve them and keep them viable. Because I think they went to a different sort of more copy-paste sort of building plan.
Sure, yeah.
They
I can see that.
They kind of centralized all of their architecture under one department, under their headquarters, where before, like Lillienberg was an independent, I don't even know that he was LDS, but he was independent architect, and he got the contract to build a number of these buildings. And so each of these buildings was unique and beautiful because the architect brought their own vision and their art and their creativity, sensibility to it.
No copy paste.
No copy paste. And then the church just like, all right, well, we don't want to be responsible for these. We're going to sell them off. And in the 70s, as we talked about, it's hard times for architecture. And that's what happened. And it's been really frustrating because the church is always very much stressing legacy and heritage. And somehow there's a disconnect with how they see that as applicable, but not applicable to their historic structures.
So this is so interesting that you say this, because I lived here as a child in the 70s.
Okay.
Bad fashion, bad architecture. And then I moved here again in the 90s, and I've watched the way people share the history change. So 70s, 90s, now I'm back. And this time I'm back and I'm realizing, oh my gosh, they've just completely wiped out an entire layer of history. And I know it's not really fair to even say that because, Native Americans have been shortchanged all around, and they were here long before the pioneers.
Absolutely.
But from what I know and what I see, I can see what's been wiped out. And to your point, when you wipe out an entire bit of your history, then the buildings where those took place, to where that history took place, is also no longer important.
Right. It's erased.
Yeah, it's erased as well. So what's your take on the state of historic preservation in Salt Lake County, Amy?
Yeah, no, it's really upsetting. We just lost a Pantages theater.
Yes.
There was a big fight over that one. And that was a really sad one to lose because it was beautiful.
I ran by that this morning and took a photo. So I actually put it on Instagram. Just this blank lot.
And, it was so contentious. Even, Nicole Curtis, preservationist, rehab addict, got involved. She's on their board. On the Pantages board. I was having a fun time last night. She was ranting at Salt Lake City again last night.
I also heard that.
Yes. But I think what I'm seeing a lot of in Murray and in Salt Lake is there's really a lot of picking and choosing. There's trade-offs that we're having to make. So, for instance, here, they're keeping the Murray Mansion, but they want to tear down the Arlington, which is an old 30s school. They want to tear down that to get money for fixing up the Murray Mansion.
Well, and probably to offset the cost of building the great big new
yes, parking
city
garage
hall.
and parking garage.
Yeah.
And in Salt Lake proper, there's a lot of the contention around the Pantages and stuff is because they are funding work on what's that building that you went to their meeting?
Oh, the Fisher.
Yes, the Fisher Mansion. So they're going to restore the Fisher Mansion, but we're losing other buildings. And even the statewide preservation organization, Preservation Utah, they're very obviously trying to work within the city and save something. So they're kind of working that way. Like, okay, well, we'll save this one and sacrifice that one.
Interesting. And I also see that trend too, where the area is willing to save the fancy high style stuff, but they're not necessarily. I mean, even the Pantages, it was a kind of unassuming. It went through a
on the
60s.
Yeah.
The inside was nothing what you'd expect from looking at the outside. It was amazing inside.
But I think, and I wonder if they were only like kind of looking at the outside at that point. But I don't know. I think it's really weird. You know, how many high style buildings do we have to save while we equally erase the people that kept those in high style comfortable and happy?
And with the Arlington, you know, it's not an assuming building. It was built during the Depression era. It was a Works Progress Administration building.
Which we love about that because Murray had a number of projects, which I thought were interesting.
So it was that. And it did have some unfortunate facade changes in the windows in the 80s, 70s, 80s. And
but it's darn 70s.
I know, but it still looks beautiful. Like even with those alterations, like it's still a really unique Art Deco building. But the Murray Mansion is from the Victorian era, so it looks much prettier.
Flashier. It's a flashier building to say.
Even the city council has said, like, this isn't a nice looking building.
Well, and everybody that's not on the side of preserving the fabric of our community, and that's really what it is. Like you keep picking and choosing, as Amy said, which threads you're going to pull out of that historic fabric and the thing that has made your city a city for years and deciding, time has moved on and we can discard this part of it and that part of it. It becomes extremely threadbare. And then with that lost relevance, it makes it even harder to try to advocate for the next thing, right? Well, we've lost so much already. We just give up, right? And we get that a lot. We get that a lot.
Yeah, that is interesting. So the Historic Murray First Foundation has been started because we backtracked a little bit.
So
there.
2018.
In 2018. And were you were successful in saving the library?
We were not. That was an enormous loss and really took the wind out of our... Yeah, it was terrible because the building was what at one time would have been considered flashy. It had a beautiful tower to it that you could see from Murray Park and surrounding. It was kind of like a visible thing.
Very Gothic tower.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That was the church.
It had beautiful pointed arch windows in it, and it had additions over the years, but they were sensitively done and they worked with it. So there was that. And when we were advocating, I tried to impress on people in the city, do you know what a Carnegie Library is? Do you know how important the fact that Murray qualified to have a Carnegie Library? And that's that right there highlights that people don't understand the importance of that. Mm-hmm. That was not easy. That meant a community had arrived, like that they were being recognized as a place that a Carnegie Library could be put in. And that broke my heart. It was just the fact that people have lost sight of what that meant and how important that was, that it could just be wiped out. And so we were trying very hard there were 3 people. We started with 3 people and we were trying to do everything. And it was just so overwhelming, trying to raise money to try to buy the building, try to get someone who had money to try to buy the building that was friendly to it, all of these things. And the mayor that Murray had at the time was so antagonistic to historic preservation that they were doing things that got them sued for not following their own laws. There was supposed to be a design review process and all of it, and they were circumventing and shortcutting through their own codes on the book. And so our founder went to court with them over it, and Murray City lost. The judge ruled that, if you've got these codes, you need to be following them. And they are still mad. I don't know, today we've got a different mayor and he's much better. And
they remember though.
Sure.
But that caused so much bad blood because they lost in court over this. So there was no way of saving any kind of relationship with the policymakers in that administration. And so at that point, it was just like, we're going to shortcut you, and we were trying to figure out how to get around them. And it's hard because they have all the levers of power, right? And they're now mad at us, really, really mad. it was much better when there was an election and we got a new mayor and a new administration who are much friendlier to listening and hearing. That doesn't mean that they're great at acting on the things that we recommend, but they have always been gracious about hearing us and trying to implement what they feel is right.
I do want to say a little bit, you kind of skipped over a little bit, was the city's response to losing that lawsuit.
Right.
Was not positive just for preservationists, but their response was to gut the preservation codes in Murray.
Yeah.
And that's how we lost the building.
Yep. We had a robust set of historic preservation codes that had been there for 20 years, almost 20 years. So their response was to come and take out all of the protections that we had. And the Preservation Utah executive director, I had asked him, I'm like, how do we deal with this? And he said, well, I don't know what to tell you because I was referring people that wanted preservation codes in their cities to look to Murray and Provo as examples. And then we didn't have those anymore. And their excuse is, we feel like it's too onerous on owners of historic properties. We feel like they're being told that they can't do what they can and can't do with their properties. Mm-hmm. And we don't feel that that's right. But I don't think that was all of the story.
Sure. Interesting. So let's talk about the people of Murray. What's the population here?
Something like it's over 50,000, maybe slightly over 50,000, 52 maybe.
Have you seen a shift in your favor? Are the tides turning? Because it sounds like to me sort of a David and Goliath situation.
Yeah, totally.
And it's just you guys. And like when I think about what if all 50,000, or let's go smaller. What if 20,000 people or 10,000 people were interested in protecting the historic structures of Murray? Wouldn't that carry some weight?
Yeah, well, and that's actually something that we try to do and activate, get people in the community, because while the city leaders may not listen to us, I mean, they'll listen to us, but they're not listening to us.
Sure.
When we have
I can read between the lines.
Yes. When we have a lot of people show up at these council meetings and speak about it, they do listen. So for instance, I believe it was in 2021 is when I got involved in the foundation, and they were proposing to rip out all of what we call Block 1. And that's on State Street between Vine Street and 4800 South. And it is our only remaining really block of historic buildings. And people are living in them. Like they're affordable apartments,
housing,
everything. And they were proposing to demo that and build some modern.
Of course, higher.
Yeah.
Higher.
I think it was like 7 stories.
Yeah.
And we were obviously not very happy with that. So when the developer posted an open house to see and talk about their development, we activated and we got many people in the community to attend this open house, make comments. We stood outside that building and handed out flyers. We did, and it was an election season as well. So we hosted a candidate Q&A just to get our name out there and asked them a lot of preservation questions. And we got the community rallied up on this. And because of all the negative response the city had, they actually let that contract with that developer expire. So that was one of our wins. And another thing that came of that is when the new council was elected and the new mayor came, they actually decided to put out a city survey asking what people wanted to do with that and what they considered historic. And I think 70% said that they would prefer historic architecture. And if you can't,
historic feeling.
If you can't save it, they want something that looks historic and not modern. So we won that. We feel really proud about that. But we're still having to remind the city about the survey and
constantly.
What the results say. Right. And one of the things that we also hear a lot about, because right now Salt Lake City has no land. They've built it all. And people are coming in. We're one of the fastest growing states in the U.S. right now, and we have Silicon Slopes. So we've got a lot of tech people coming in. It's really friendly to businesses. So there's a lot of movement here. And with that, they're needing to find new housing for people. So their solution is generally we'll tear down 2 old houses and build high-rise that fits like 400 people.
And when we say high-rise, we have developer friends who said, that's 7 stories is not a high-rise. Well, I'm like, but for Murray it is.
Yeah. Sure. And so we have a lot of those going up. We have actually had meetings with City Council where I have tried to impart on them the sustainability of keeping the buildings. And, I've compared how many tons of landfill that is versus this. And I've talked to them about the cost of rehabilitating versus building new. And it's always in our favor. It's always in preservation favor. Mm-hmm. And it's like they see, we just need more people. I'm like, you can get those people and they can be hidden. There's hidden density. There's mid-level ways that this can be done. And you're tearing out all the only affordable housing and building these big mid-rise buildings that nobody can afford anyway.
Yeah, they're never affordable. They're never affordable homes. And so the people that really need housing, it's the little buildings that are like 4 stories high that have retail street level and a couple of stories on top that we have on block 1. And we've had people from those apartments reach out to us and say, we like where we live and we can afford it. Can you help us save our homes? And we're trying our best. It's just keeping people continually engaged, because the nature of politics, and this isn't just about Murray City, not to pick on them, but the nature of politics is that if you're not constantly in their ear, then you have to plan on them not remembering your message at all, right? The developers have all the money. The developers are always in their ear, and there's way more power there just because of the money.
They have the money.
My recent endeavor in meeting with the city is to remind them that the real stakeholders in the community are the homeowning taxpayers, and what they want should be taken into consideration first and foremost, and maybe way down the list, the developers' money. That's the way it should work.
Are there any developers in the area that are historic preservation friendly? And the reason why I ask you that is because if in Buffalo, there's the housing stock, the building stock, well over 100 years old, pretty much everything. And we kind of went through those times too. And then now there is a developer there who's very sensitive to historic preservation, and it's made all the difference. And I'm wondering, does that exist here or no?
There have been a few.
It's rare, but there are some. And there are some architecture firms that are historic preservation focused. And we've worked with them. They've done some CRSA architects. They've done some beautiful renderings for us recently of what the Arlington School/City Hall building could be turned into without it being torn down.
Right.
And we've really been trying to get those out to the community so they can have a visual. There's a really wonderful old school adaptation down on State Street and just past 106 that is a Shake Shack, but they kept it. The developer kept it. And I think you're nodding. You know what I'm talking about.
That's neat.
And I was talking to Salt Lake Demolished podcast, and she was telling me that she had worked at Preservation Utah at the time and saw the transformation of that building, that they kept the old chalkboards and everything and integrated that into the decor and the design and the aesthetic of the building. Right. And that they were very picky about who was going to go in there so that they could maintain the feel that they were after. So there are, and we do try to source them out, and we do try to form alliances with developers that are willing to listen to us. And there are some.
Right. That's great. All right. We're starting to run out of time.
Sorry.
No. I wasn't saying that because you've been talking too much. So let's quickly talk about Save the Arlington campaign, because you've touched on the Arlington. Yes. I want to make sure we talk a little bit about that and how people can get involved in that if they'd like to.
Yes. Well, as we mentioned, it was built in the 30s, an Art Deco building. It was actually the second Arlington school. They had one behind it prior that got torn down after the new one was built. And in the 70s or 80s, it became the City Hall. And that's
1982.
Yeah. And that's when some of those changes to the facade, and they put a fountain out in front. But actually the wall behind it is still the original school with the stone foundation. And it does look like an unassuming building, but it has a very sleek art moderne aesthetic. It could be a really beautiful building. And it's on one of the very few remaining green spaces left on Salt Lake County and on State Street.
For sure.
So we definitely think that this building is worthy of saving. And it's one of the few left that we have to save. And we have the theater, and then we have that. And that's it. That's really all we have for the most part. We feel like it's really important. And the city, they're amenable, but they need people to speak up. And I know a lot in the community are really feeling down and like nobody listens to them. But if we all come together and speak about saving this building, having the city sell it with a deed restriction, not allowing it to be demolished, we can do this together. We just need you all to join us. And we do have a whole campaign and information and email addresses to contact the city leaders on our website at historicmurrayfirst.org.
Great. So that would be where they would contact. historicmurrayfirst.org would be where they would find links also to if they want to follow you on Instagram. Yep. Do you have a Facebook group or Facebook?
We do have a Facebook page. We don't have a group. It has a Facebook page, Instagram, YouTube. And we post all of our we do lectures, LinkedIn. Free lectures on the community. And we just did one on historic windows the other night.
I love it.
And
it was wonderful, Amy.
Yeah, those go on our YouTube channel.
That's great. So, I'll have to look that up for sure. Wonderful. Well, I will also put all of that information in the show notes for this episode so people can find it. If you can't remember, if you're out there listening, you can't remember, it'll be right in the show notes for you. But
great.
Amy and Rachel, thank you. This interview was funny. I feel like we sort of stirred it all up and then we didn't come to any conclusion. But you know what? Historic preservation is messy. We're in the middle. We're
That's
not
the
at
nature
the end.
of it. Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. It was great to meet you both. Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses, and thank you to our guests today, Amy Thomas and Rachel Morrow.
The Historic Murray First Foundation is currently seeking donations for the Save the Arlington project. The Arlington is Murray's City Hall building. Learn how you can help at historicmurrayfirst.org.
And to continue the conversation, join us on Facebook and Instagram at True Tales from Old Houses, and me personally at Blake Hill House, or Daniel Cantor at Daniel Cantor.
And to learn more about everything we discussed in today's episode or request a transcript, please visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. And of course, Stacy and I would both be thrilled if you would take the time to leave a review and subscribe to this podcast. It's a great way to support the show and let others know that it's worth a listen.
Until next time.
Thanks, everyone.